years and years and years ago.
Mm.
Geiz ist geil.
Oh, Bill, I worked for them for 15 years.
Did you? Which one was it? Was it Lidl?
It was Saturn.
Oh, was it? Oh, right.
Yes,
Different one.
electronics retailer. Geiz ist geil. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi,
Yep.
Bob.
Hi,
Geiz ist geil. Geiz
Geiz
ist geil.
My perfect German. I understand.
You had a haircut, Bob.
Yes, well, Lizzie gave me a haircut, as always. She
Good.
does, yeah.
Yep.
And it didn't fall out watching England against France, I promise you. Yeah.
Right.
So have you done the football talk, or Bill, are you not into football so much? Are you more
I'm not really. I did watch the match last night. In fact, I watched it in a pub with a friend, which was by far the best way of doing it. So
yeah, it was good.
yeah. Well, the second goal was fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So it should be another good game tonight. Yeah.
Yep. I will watch it tonight. Yeah. Right. Now, this so what thing, this is for the benefit of, and I think Mark and Varsha have in fact joined us. So they're testing out the, oh, for some reason, I don't see them anymore on the Zoom screen. Maybe they've gone.
Who was joining us?
This is being broadcast live on YouTube.
Okay, cool.
So there is, and I put you probably can't see it because you weren't in at the time, but I'm going to put it up there.
I didn't realize, but must watch my P's and Q's. That's an expression, Bo.
Very good. Yeah.
I always have to explain idioms to Bo a little bit. Yeah.
Right.
That's very good.
Non-native speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we do have a couple of people because we had an event, a Zoom event in Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. I had posted it generally to people, and so we do have Marsha and Mark. And Mark has just said, have to say, difficult for me to listen and not talk because I'm reading comments. They can actually comment on YouTube.
Okay.
So we're testing out this facility because Varsha is the chairperson of SIPS Switzerland. And if this is a way of doing webinars in future, because if you do a Zoom meeting without a full account, you're limited to 100 people unless you pay Zoom quite a lot of money. You can do for a standard personal sub, you can get 100 people in a meeting, which is a lot.
It's a lot.
But if you want to go to a webinar, then it's silly money. But you can live stream it to YouTube, as I'm doing at the moment.
Very good.
And if people sign up in YouTube, as opposed to just watching, then they can pass comments as well.
It's a pity that I can't see those comments though, unfortunately, but I do appreciate comments coming.
I'm very glad that I cannot see the comments. I'm very much going to.
If you actually do bring it up on a different screen and the YouTube.
That's beyond Bob. He won't be able to do that.
Okay. Well, I got two screens, Bob, you see.
I don't believe Bo when he says these things.
And I've signed in on YouTube, so I'm getting the comments and I can make comments as we go through. So we'll see how it goes. No, I can't see you, Varsha. No, definitely not. Marsha says I can't see them. Maybe I said I could see them. No, I can just read what they say.
Was it a little bit of a panic in her voice there?
There was just a little. It wasn't a voice. It's just a typed message.
Right, okay, good. Okay.
And Mark says, how about MS Teams? We all have that. I don't like MS Teams personally. I find everyone has it, but it never seems to work. But anyway, let's get on to today, because this is slightly different from, this is beyond procurement. This is about business culture, sociology, philosophy in general. And I asked, unfortunately, Michelle can't join us, Bob, because she cut her finger off, or nearly cut it off.
Okay.
And she's with A&E on Sunday and getting something done to it in surgery today. So
that's a reasonable excuse.
I think it's a pity she can't join us because I had hoped that she would bring a lot on ecosystems in the supply chain
Okay.
in, but we'll have to understudy on that one.
Mhm.
And my reason for doing it is to talk about ecosystems, not the sort of ecosystems that everybody's used to, but ecosystems as an open system, a system which is not predictable, a system in which change happens unpredictably, because people are involved. And all of the, I'm going to exaggerate slightly here, but all of the business tools that we're taught to use, or if you had the fortune, good or bad fortune, to do an MBA, which are drilled into you by the business schools, all use something called reductionist thinking, meaning that they all try and break down systems into components. First, they define the system, then they try and break it down into the individual components, and then they try and understand the input-output relationships on each individual component and study it separately. And then they reassemble it all, a bit like you take an internal combustion engine with carburetors and crankshafts and cylinder heads and petrol tanks and that sort of thing. And then you put it all together and you say, hey, now I understand it. And if it was a wiring diagram or the plumbing of a house, or even, dare I say it, an internal combustion engine, yes, your reductionist principles have understood it well enough. Now, you may miss the way in which the crankshaft vibrates at a certain resonance and breaks the chassis or something like that, because these things interact with each other. You've certainly missed the fact that you're puffing carbon dioxide out of the back of the vehicle, polluting the atmosphere and destroying humanity in the long term. But hey, that doesn't cost us anything today, so why would you have that in your system? And these are some of the well-known drawbacks of reductionist thinking about systems. But we're taught about things like, and I'm going to mention a few of them here, and I do have a crib sheet, process mapping, target operating models.
Oh, love TOMs, yeah.
TOMs, yeah. Organograms, value streams, value chains, Porter's 5 forces. They all...
Speaking my language now, Bill.
I know, they all define a system and then start analyzing the bits inside it. And then not only do they try and analyze how the system works, they're used for planning and strategizing and forecasting outputs and all that sort of thing. And yet, these systems contain people that are totally unpredictable. They react with each other. They analyze and think, what if we did this? Let's try it. They get bored. They get fed up with things. They do things differently. And it's from those sort of interactions that we get creativity and innovation and change and real improvement. And if you stick with the reductionist principles of cost saving, for instance, or efficiency or productivity, then you're locked in to something that has an endpoint. The endpoint is obsolescence, because you can never change, and then something overtakes you, and you're out of the market. And so companies that focus entirely on these reductionist principles, they just get more and more efficient at doing one thing. And we've seen it in all our lives, in companies we've worked for, in companies who've supplied us, in our customers, and in people we buy stuff from personally. And the companies that are really creative and innovative, they're actually quite fat. They're the opposite of lean, because they have people who argue with each other. They encourage argument, debate. They encourage competition between people. They don't mind that it's inefficient, because it generates ideas. And in fact, internally, there's competition for those ideas to survive. And so you get politics. And so when something emerges from that maelstrom of internal competition, it's actually already fairly well formed and challenged and thought about. And this is so different from the reductionist thinking that goes into business tools, it seems odd that we pile all of encourage people to use these reductionist tools and then say as an afterthought, oh, and by the way, you've got to be innovative and creative at the same time. Well, no, it doesn't work. And it's a problem I've wrestled with for quite a long time and have no answers for. And I really wanted to raise it with the two of you and see if there's any direction we can take with it. And see if there are ways, practical ways, in which people can be encouraged to say, right, this is reductionist, this is an ecosystem, the opposite of reductionist.
I'm kind of mentally mounting my defense for reductionism, but before I don't know, Bob, if you want to, because I don't know, I have no idea where you're gonna take this, Bob, because I can imagine you going left or right or staying. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, of course, first presentation, very interesting, quite polemical. Of course, it's that it's an either or. I mean, you're polarizing quite strongly here, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I wonder whether this is a continuum and a situationally based continuum rather than two opposing philosophies. I mean, if we just take maybe one of the reductionist theories, which you mentioned, lean.
Mm-hmm.
Is lean so bad?
Yes.
Why?
Because
elimination of waste, continuous learning. These things are quite optimal ways to optimize, not necessarily to transform, to innovate, as you say, but optimization is part of the game at a certain level.
Driving efficiency is certainly part of the game, and for a lot of companies, it is the only game.
Mm-hmm.
And they're quite happy because they're working on quarterly results, or at best, at most, annual reporting. And in that period of time, it's just efficiency. It's the name of the game. So lean in those situations, absolutely perfect. But if you're trying to evolve and move with a market or come up with something new and different, nope, it's wrong.
Okay, so lean, the reductionist philosophies are also linked to let's call it a capitalist ecosystem of very short termism.
I think capitalism isn't necessarily short term, but definitely short termism. Yes.
Okay. Which itself, what's interesting, if you think about agile as a philosophy, it embeds the concept of short termism with the concept of sprint.
Well, that's fascinating because agile appears to embed the principle of short-termism, but is it also a long-term strategy? Because agile is used for project management. So people have in their minds, this is the target, this is how we're going to get there. Here's the scrum and the sprint and the fast fail and what have you. But they're thinking of this short-term target. But what about agile as a philosophy? What about agile as everything we do is short-term, but with a long-term goal? So that you're not trying to make things as efficient as possible all the time. You're challenging it all the time and saying, does it actually work? Let's try something else. And therefore, the concept of lean agile seems to me to be awful. Fat agile, I quite like. Because then you've got the resources should you want to change and do things differently and challenge it and throw something out and start again. Or do two things simultaneously and see which one works out and have an end point where you say, right, we're going with this one. So agile, the way it's used, I think, is reductionist, but has potential to be more in an ecosystem. More like Darwinian evolution, which is quite agile. Darwinian evolution is the ultimate ecosystem. There's no goal, it's just long term, it's survival.
Well, yes. We don't go into Darwin because Bo will probably leave the room because he objects every time I quote Darwin.
For us, Bob. Yeah, Bob likes to quote Darwin. Yeah, and okay, but I'm just thinking with this idea about I want to defend reductionism because I mean it's kind of the basis for communication. It's what we do when we speak. Language. I mean, what is language? Language is a sort of a poor approximation of what's going on inside. And we are trying, I mean, someone once said, I think like a genius, I speak like a normal person. And no, I write like a normal person and I speak like a child. And it's, you just never get it. Yeah. And language is just it's just it's reducing reality already. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think that's fantastic. We need reductionism. And so I think it becomes dangerous when we don't know that we're doing it. There's this quote, I mean, you brought that to my attention, Bob. George Box said, all models are false, but some models are useful. And what the way I understand that is that every time you have a model, like a map, take a map, right? A map is not the landscape. And obviously a map is not real or not true. It's an approximation, it's a reduction. But some maps are useful because it gets you to where you want. And some models can be very useful. But where obviously, we cannot really disagree about the fact that when we think that our models represent reality, that's when we'll run into trouble.
Well, that's exactly. I mean, a map is a reductionist thing, isn't it? But and it's obvious what the limitations of a map are, and we understand that when we use a map. I'm not sure that we understand that when we use some of these reductionist business tools and use them to form the strategy for a company, and then miss some of the big thing. Let me read a couple of comments. Lean Varsha says, daily management is the latest where LMS is applied. Does it really? When you take lean in a production floor, it makes sense, but not to stoke innovation. That makes sense. Less is often more. For real innovation, you need to focus, and that requires a reductionist approach. And it depends on the industry. Yeah, all right, all correct. Sorry, I interrupted you, as is my wont.
Well, I guess, Bo, you're making reductionism and simplification somehow synonymous, if I understand you correctly, and saying simplification is not such a bad thing. It's how the brain works, after all. That the brain is the ultimate organ of simplification, which then allows navigation through this forever unknowable reality.
But some things are not simple. Some things are complex. In some things, the components interact with each other in a totally unforecastable, unknown way. And there are externalities.
How do you know? How do you know that things are not complex?
If they involve
that they are not simple. Maybe they are simple. Because we don't know, because we don't really, we only get through to reality through our eyes and ears and thoughts, and already we are simplifying things because we cannot encompass the complexity of what is out there. So we don't really know. But Bill, we don't disagree. I'm just trying to figure out ways of which we can disagree because it's more interesting.
And I'm also thinking methodologically, because I mean, okay, reductionist models, fine, put them in the bin. Okay, then Bill, well, tell me, what is your complexity?
I don't know. This is I'm saying that reductionist models have serious issues because they're being applied to systems with people in them, and people are not forecastable. People have unknowns about them.
Well, let's talk about something, Bill. Let's talk about something that Bob loves to talk about, like, because other models, like, for example, personality models. There are lots of those on the market. The American listeners out there will know the MTBI, for example.
I know it well.
Exactly. And there's the insights with the colors and the bricks and
there's an INTP.
There's all kinds of things, and that is trying to reduce personality into 4 different colors or 4 different letters and so on. And that can go horribly wrong.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yep.
But it doesn't have to. If it's a tool, and if it's used with care, and with the appropriate sense of humility, it can unlock things. It's like a tool. You can use it to forge ways into insights that you did not know that were in you, for example. For me, it's a wonderful example of something that, you know, what do you do with a hammer? You can hurt someone, or you can build a house. And maybe it goes for other models of that
But
nature.
MBTI is quite a good one because
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs developed it from Jung.
Mhm.
And yes, it is a reductionist model, and it comes up with 4 parameters. And each parameter only is completely polar, only has on and off, either or.
Yep.
So extremely reductionist, but extremely powerful.
Yep.
If you accept its limitations,
Mhm.
and if you accept that it helps to explain some of the differences between
Yep.
people and why each of us has different reactions to different things. However,
Mm.
people have fallen into the same trap that they fall into in industry when they try and use reductionist models to plan and forecast. They use it to try and manipulate people. They use it to try and forecast how people will behave in certain situations. They categorize them and select them for jobs according to it. Um,
Yep.
you know, there's a beautiful holistic is almost the opposite of reductionist model, which Elon Musk came up with. Now, he's not flavor of the month at the moment, I know, but Elon Musk said about interviewing parameters, he said, I only have one criteria when I'm interviewing people. They've got to have done one thing that is truly remarkable. And he said, everything else follows. If they've achieved one thing that is truly remarkable, I know that they work in teams. I know that they can communicate. I know that they can survive in difficult situations, that they're tenacious. And I know they're intelligent because they've done this one thing. That's it. And that's a holistic approach that just throws all of this other stuff out of the window.
Well, Bill, I would take issue with that. I think Elon Musk is describing the opposite of your perspective, because of course ascribing a success, an individually declared success, which is remarkable, and then generalizing that single success, which is actually the output of a number of complex variables. And hey, maybe the person just got lucky. The idea that that person can then replicate that in another system, which is different and equally if more complex, is itself the great fallacy. I mean, you see it in football management. Football manager succeeds with one club, gets promoted to a more senior Premiership club and fails miserably, because you realize that success is not down to what Musk is describing.
Except that Musk wasn't saying they had to be that one success should be in the area he was recruiting them for. He was saying anything, because the skill base that they've used to achieve that one success is entirely replicatable and transferable.
I hate to agree with Bob here, but it really pains me. But if I understand you correctly, Bob, what you're saying is that the Musk thing is reductionist in the extreme.
In a way, strangely, yeah.
Because you are taking this one thing, one accomplishment, one extraordinary thing you've accomplished, and then you are just generalizing, taking, if you can do that here, then I have faith in you to do all kinds of other things. And we are ignoring 400,000 things that played into the remarkable thing that you achieved. And so it is not down to only you. It is down to 430,000 other things as well as you. So that's how I understand what you were saying. Am I close, Bob?
Exactly. In a strange kind of way, yes, we actually agree for once. It's a little bit like
it's very uncomfortable. I don't feel good about this.
But it's like heroic leadership simplifications of, you know, we won the war because of Churchill. These kind of or explaining. Obviously, it's much more complex than that. And if you look at organizational life, how they ascribe success, or leaders ascribe success to their own leadership, rather than luck, or just a good technology, or just hitting the market at the right time when demand was there. And then 10 years later, when the market changes, they suddenly realize they achieved success not because of them, but in spite of them. So I think the systemic perspective, in a sense, I think goes against Musk's perspective that success is down to individual ability. Success is down to these multiple variables, most of which are pretty invisible and possibly permanently unknowable.
Well, I think it's analyzing something according to its components is fine. It's when people take it that step too far. And in systems thinking, Musk is an example of systems thinking, but in systems thinking, one of the common tools is you don't analyze the situation in extremis. You look for a metaphor for what you're doing. You look for something that models it in perhaps in a completely different environment, maybe not even in business. You know, so if you're selling cars, you might look back at the way people sell watches, and suddenly you get an insight into why people buy cars. It's because of what the thing on your wrist says about you, or it's the thing that's wrapped around you says about you. I remember talking to a salesman from Rolls-Royce and talking about his competition, and he said our competition is Sunseeker yachts. And it's just choosing the metaphor that, you know, and that's the way Sunseeker yachts sell their products. He would learn more from them than he would from learning how BMW, BMW owned Rolls-Royce by that point, but the way that Volkswagen would work. By the way, a couple of comments here. Varsha, cross-pollination needs time to evolve, else we get the same. Reductionism can kill ideas faster, like that. And Mark, he's on Bo's page.
Very good.
More people means more complication, thus the more reductionist you need to become to get from A to Z. So I'm not sure I go along with that, but we can disagree with you and Mark, Bo.
I mean, but when we met in Switzerland, Bill, you said, you know, I get that kind of presentation that I don't believe in organization. All I see is disorganization, you know, lack of alignment, KPIs against each other, high levels of internal conflict and high levels of internal dissatisfaction. You came up to me afterwards and say, hey, maybe this is a much better model because you have inbuilt genetic diversity. And then when the environment changes, something else expresses and you have long-term survival. So in practical terms, rather than building organizations around alignment and KPIs, are you advocating a more, how would I call it, not chaotic, but a non-aligned, non-measured form of organization, just built around capable people?
I think it's one solution. I think that if you tend to expect that, you know, on the one hand, you expect reductionist targeted behavior from a group, efficiency oriented, and you expect the same group to turn up in a meeting and do a brainstorming exercise out of nowhere. It just doesn't make sense. Where if you've got a core activity that is the future of your business, it should have this diversity within it, internal competition and ideas flying and sparks and politics and anger, and waste, horrible waste. And you can have that in one area, and and things will bubble up from it that are successful. In another area that's non-core, you can drive efficiency to the nth degree. And if it fails, well, it doesn't really matter because it's not your core business. You can simply bring in, outsource it from someone else. So I'm suggesting that the way in which we look at business is wrong. And that's one example of how to put it right.
So all of that would, of course, entail running a business with a much lower EBITDA margin.
Yeah, it would.
So that would require a fundamental realignment of what a healthy business looks like. That high EBITDA might indicate leanness in that classical sense, which is short-term unsustainable, whereas low EBITDA, smaller margins might indicate a bit of healthy fatness.
Well, you can always fiddle it EBITDA, because you just leave out capital. Yeah, and so if you call this this maelstrom of waste capital, and then it's not included in EBITDA. Because EBITDA is earnings before interest, earnings before interest, What's the T?
Cash flow.
Turnover. What? Depreciation and amortization. So the depreciation and amortization are taken out. Tax, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. So you're taking out bits. So yeah, but the point is, anything short term will be difficult.
I mean, are there any organizations, Bill, that you see living, at least at a proto level, the kind of principles that you're advocating? I mean,
I think they do. They do it without admitting it. I think it's like whenever people write SOPs, and people write SOPs from this reductionist thinking and then expect people to follow them, but nobody ever follows an SOP except in regulated industries. I mean, I've seen SOPs created in two different areas for exactly the same thing, and you wouldn't have recognized that they were the same thing at all. As soon as you create an SOP, it's history, and then everybody works around it in order to actually make it work. I mean, in industry, what is the classic way in which the unions brought a business to its knees? They worked to rule. They followed the SOPs, and the business is stopped within a fortnight because it is the informal that runs a business, not the formal.
Yeah, it's interesting that I often say provocatively, if you have a job description from HR, throw it out the window, because that neither describes the scope of your role, nor should it, because but then there's an unhealthy reality to that, Bill, that going the extra mile or doing all this informal fat stuff, you don't get paid for it. You end up working 80 hours a week. That's how realities embed what you're describing, and it's the elephant in the room. It's illegal, and it's causing huge stress levels in organizations. So maybe many companies are doing what you're saying, but they're doing it deeply under the radar. In order that they can not pay people for doing it.
I think they expect people to do it, and I think people do it for fun, to add a bit of interest to their job.
That's a rather optimistic way of saying that people who are overworked don't need to be paid for it, provocatively speaking.
Yeah. In my experience, most people are underworked, but that's
okay. Now, I think there's a dark side to organization. That organizations are trying to do too much with too few people, but they're not doing that because they believe in kind of fat organization in the sense of people overloaded. They're actually trying to be, they're doing what they would term as lean in a way. And maybe curiously, we have a strange paradox here that organizations are using a narrative, to use the word that you don't like, Bo, of lean, that they're using the efficiency mantra to describe what they're doing, but maybe they're actually living what you're saying, Bill. They're actually pretty chaotic. There's a lot of extra effort being put into kind of informal activity. People are actually following their motivations. Maybe the narrative that organizations live by is a lie. Maybe they're actually doing what you want them to do, Bill.
I think you've got it.
Maybe it's just there, but nobody sees it.
I think you've got it.
Which would be I don't know why that would be. Why would we live a lie?
Is it living a lie? I mean,
well, if we're kind of living these kind of reductionist philosophies, but none of these capture the reality.
People who work in an organization, and you ask them, "Are you 100% productive all of the time?" Or like to say you work 40 hours. How many of those hours are you being actually sort of like one-to-one productive? And they would probably say something, 60, 70%. I don't know, something like that. But there is a definite, everybody would agree that there is a lot of fat, there's a lot of redundancy happening when we get together in an organization.
Yeah, but Bo, it's called inefficiency. It's called, it has a negative label. But what Bill is saying is actually this is efficiency.
Yeah, but I think
Mark is still on. Bo, you're going to get some support from Mark here. He says we agree on the uselessness of SOPs, But that's, for me, is not reductionist, but administrative ballast. Reductionist for me is to use strategic models to effectively make decisions, to focus resources.
Or to pretend to focus resources.
Well, that's where I am. Yeah. I think there's a lot of pretense going on here, for the audience.
Aha. Do you think that senior leadership kind of get what you're saying and probably buy into it? But
I think some do and some definitely do not.
But even the ones who do not, they're disconnected from reality, because although they believe in their reductionist models, they actually have little impact or effect on how the business runs.
Yeah.
I think we should be really happy about the fact that there is redundancy, because imagine we all had 10, 15 more hours of free time on our hands. The world would descend into chaos immediately. I think it's very, very good that we keep people in their jobs and in organizations, that they limit the damage we would otherwise be engaging in. But there is, and obviously, if you look at just purely numbers, the drive toward efficiency it's obviously very, very attractive, because we see the 20% and we can tweak here and go on there, and obviously when we overdo it, which frequently happens, things break down. We see it a little bit, I don't know, with this kind of in the pandemic and so on, when we've kind of like taken away the serendipity, we've taken away the chance meetings, we've taken away the meeting, the kind of the walk to the meeting room and the conversations that take place not in the meeting room, because the meetings themselves have actually become very, very, very efficient, and more, I would say, more efficient possibly in a virtual environment. But we're missing the stuff in between, and we are more and more coming to the realization of what it is that we've been missing. But I'm sure it's driving some people crazy, because there's 20% of efficiency just lying there, pure gold. But obviously it's not. We need it.
I think that's right. I think that is right. I think we're discovering that the world was moving in this direction anyway, this discovery. I'm sure of that. This systems thinking thing has been going on for a while. I think the pandemic has focused people on, do we perform better in the office or worse? And certainly these meetings seem highly efficient, but we're not talking as much over coffee before the meeting and after it. When it ends, everyone switches off and goes away. They don't say, what are you doing for the next half hour? Because I'm getting worried about so-and-so's ideas.
Yeah. But then are you saying, Bill, that these reductionist theories are actually almost mythologies? They're stories we tell ourselves, but actually very few people actually believe them, or not everybody believes them. And in fact, most business professionals, they kind of know the rule of the game is to play in, through, and outside of these mythologies, because they know that that's how actually things get done.
Yeah. Or they're not worried how things get done, but they are worried about having outputs rather than outcomes, deliverables. And if they're paid on a deliverable, they'll deliver it even if it's not useful. And I think we got to the stage where these reductionist principles and tools, they create deliverables that people can latch onto and say, this is my deliverable, this is my target for the year. So I'm owed a bonus. And it fits very well into that sort of system, but it doesn't actually help people.
It reminds me of a term I came across in terms of reading something about project management, about intelligent disobedience. That this quality is a kind of a very important quality when you're leading a complex project, to work against the myths in order to do the right thing. Maybe we should credit people with the same intelligence with which we accredit ourselves, that people can see these false gods pretty clearly and are able to work through them and around them. It's never documented, it's never part of the official narrative, but this kind of forgotten history is actually the major history, as it is with society too. It's just never captured anywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Have you been
yeah.
watching? Maybe I mentioned this before. I've certainly mentioned it to someone recently. SAS Rogue Heroes.
I've seen these series, SAS Specialist Air Service, Bo, just to explain.
Okay.
No,
No. Yeah.
no,
Special Air Service, yeah.
yeah.
SAS Rogue. It's available if you've got no, you would need to be watching BBC, isn't it BBC? I'm not
It
sure.
is, yes. Yeah,
Anyway, you
BBC.
probably need, it's in the UK television, so you need some sort of proxy server or whatever. But there's a bit where the Irishman is training the French commandos,
Mhm.
and he tells them to, with an awful lot of expletives, he tells them to build two towers in the desert, 10 meters high, I think. And he says, anyone, any questions? And they say, no, no. So, well, you fucking well ought to have questions. You should be asking me, why the fuck are we building, excuse the YouTube listeners, building towers 10 feet high in the middle of the fucking desert?
Yeah.
And one of them protests and says, we're commandos, we're soldiers. We're trained to do as we're told. Not here, you're not, And he's really saying, that you've got to understand what the longer term goal is, why you're being asked to do what you're doing, challenge it. And we raised it the last leadership thing we had, didn't we, when we talked about that. That to me was part of it, that people do their own thing and have to be encouraged do their own thing, and this idea of everyone being aligned in the same direction, very, very reductionist, very efficiency oriented, and means that the company will run extremely well until it's suddenly irrelevant.
So are we pointed to some behavioral success factors for this Darwinian organizational culture, one where there is high critical thinking, for example, high levels of disagreement tolerated, and also almost independent cells operating without overall supervision, just in the belief that if enough people do that, enough of the right things will emerge.
Well, isn't that the way companies start anyway? Didn't Google start like that? Didn't Amazon start like that? And then eventually they get mature and they lose the ability, or the shareholders start thinking, oh, what you got to do now is de-agglomerate, because they become like conglomerates, and everybody now wants to say to Google, actually, you have 6 different businesses, separate them out and create value by all driving efficiency in that sector. But that's not the way they grew.
Well, the weird thing is, they start to organize, and that's the paradox. Well, this word organize has a peculiar feel to it, because now I'm beginning to think that organize, which it's difficult to see organizing as a negative, but actually what we're saying now is that organizing should be a pejorative.
If it drives efficiency and predictability, and it's extremely good if you're designing a wiring circuit or plumbing a house
in a closed system.
But it could be a pejorative term, and organized is the opposite of organic. And Google grew organically by doing lots and lots of different things and seeing what worked in a Darwinian way. And now it's got to the point where people are saying, well, I have to organize this, it's not got a big enough return on capital or whatever.
So coming back to Bo was speaking about language before, rather than saying let's organize, what would you say, Bill? What's the alternative verb?
I don't think I'm not sure you have to. This is why it's a big open question for me, because the shareholders are quite happy while the share price is going up while the company's growing, but suddenly it gets mature, and all they want it to do is drive efficiency. And they're not necessarily sure that they want that company to survive. They're not necessarily sure that they want the CEO and the directors to invest in inefficiency and all the things we've been talking about, the chaos, the competition, the politics, in the hope of finding some sort of lifeboat that they can take to, or maybe profit in the future. They've gone up the sigmoid curve. They've reached the top. They don't want to start this difficult bit again. So they're quite happy for the company now to decline steadily. And when that company is less profitable than others, they'll dump the shares and go and invest somewhere else. So if you're the CEO of a company and you're involved in procurement, say you're really concerned about the bottom line and procurement savings and efficiencies and all the rest of it, you're just a mature company, managing the thing into the decline. And the shareholders okay with that. They'll just dump the shares whenever they can and move them somewhere else. So it's almost a conspiratorial thing by the board to encourage innovation, but not quite sure how to do it. There's so many angles to this. I really don't know any. I don't know the right questions. And
well,
you've discovered that very quickly.
You also dodged my answer, because I do think we need to create a language for this, because language, in the end of the day, enables dialogue. And I was just thinking as you were speaking, maybe when a business reaches a certain level of maturity, and I've never heard an organization or a leader say this, maybe they need to de-organize. How about that as a concept? We need to start.
Yes, but I think some companies do that, don't they? Sort of like when they reach a certain
well, you say that, but they've never used the word de-organize, which I've just invented. For which I received no credit.
It's important for you to get credit for the investment.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah,
that's what it's really all about.
Yeah.
Okay. They split up into smaller pods and they try to. I mean, again.
No, that's not de-organization. That's just restructuring. That's actually the opposite. That's trying to reorganize. De-organize would be say, let's take away our KPIs. Let's take away our goals. Let's take away controls.
Why would they do that? Why, in order to do what?
To recover. To recover from the reductionist virus, which they have injected.
Oh, I like that.
And what would that? What would that
did you hear that? Bill liked my language.
You like that, yeah? But that doesn't mean that I do. In order to do what? So that you've now recovered from the reductionist virus, and now what?
So you've released your latent creativity and emergent reality.
Yeah, but you don't have any products for customers to buy anymore, because nobody. It's kind of like nobody sought to buy the products that was needed for production to get stuff done. So it's like we are all happy and without a job. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, it's obviously a kind of a manic, to some degree.
Oh, so there's management in here. Okay.
Well, hang on. Our companies do create skunkworks.
Yes.
Companies do create hothouses, greenhouses.
But that's not de-organizing. That's restructuring, Bob would say.
No, it isn't. It isn't, because the formula for creating a skunkworks or a hothouse is you say, these guys, you finance them, and you say, you're on your own, guys. We will give you training, we will give you information, as you feel you need it. But we're not going to tell you what to do. And that is a format that has been developed. I don't know how successfully, but
well, Bo, in your previous company, that was to some degree how digital innovation was created. And you create an independent company, its own logic, its own rules, interfaces unpredictably with the mothership. That's it's a well recognized. I don't think it's de-organization. I think de-organization would be of the mothership itself, and almost in an unpredictable way, to some degree at a profit threatening level. But embedded in that is a trust that by doing that you will actually unleash productivity rather than cause collapse.
I'm going to use one of your words, Bob, narrative. I don't know why it just came to me, but when I was young in the 1980s, which is a lot later than when you guys were young, but there was people were critical about growth. And that's a very strange concept today, to be critical. For the past 20 years, it's like that's not something you can be. It's not possible to be critical about something so fundamentally good and true and right. And but back then, that was something that people questioned, and maybe it's coming back now. We can only hope. But it just seemed like a mantra for such a narrative for such a long time that it was impossible for people to actually put a question mark to. I don't know why these things happen, because it seemed to happen very, very quickly. There's a quote by someone. I'm going to try and find that somewhere.
So another word, Bo, we need to degrow.
Do
Shrink.
you want me to applaud you for that word as well, Bob?
Well, yeah, new language for new reality.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
No, I like the idea of deorganizing.
Yeah.
There's something in that.
I think that's quite it would be interesting to think what that might look like. It might be, removal of targets.
Yeah. Now, it would have been good if Michelle had been here, because she's done an awful lot on supply chains with very organized companies, engineering companies who live, think, and breathe organization and structured supply chains. And they included Rolls-Royce, who's developed some very innovative ways of selling their products, including power by the hour, which means that you don't actually sell engines. You plug the engines into a 111 or a Boeing something or other, and you charge the customer for how many horsepower per hours the thing is running for.
Pay-as-you-go model. Kind of
Pay-as-you-go model for for aircraft engines. And so there are very novel ideas coming out, and they have extraordinarily complex supply chains. So it would have been good for Michelle to bring a touch of reality to bring me down to earth on occasions. But she's not here. She's getting her finger sewn back on.
So deorganize, going back to what you were saying a little bit earlier, but is almost a way of cancelling your business model and looking out at emergent business models and reconfiguring your business model quite kind of fundamentally, rather than move away from capital investment into pay as you go, because that suddenly provides transformation, and you'll never get that incrementally with reductionist models, in fact.
Yeah, that's right.
But deorganization might allow a kind of a quantum leap from one business model to the next. So it's a kind of transformation process, actually.
And is it a process? I mean, if you make it into a process, aren't you going down a reductionist path?
Probably
that finds ways of reducing it to a set of rules that cancel it out.
We have to use the word an impulse without a clearly defined endpoint. But the more companies that do it, the more trust there will be that impulses lead to results.
Assuming companies should do it. And I go back to the one where the shareholders may not be that keen for them to waste money on that sort of initiative. They may say, you make perfectly good widgets and you've got customers for those perfectly good widgets. You can make them cheaper and cheaper and more of them until suddenly people stop wanting that widget. That doesn't worry us as shareholders, because by that time we've moved our money somewhere else.
Okay, so you dispose of the shares 3 years before the company collapses, because you're smart enough to see that the reductionist model is about to reach the tipping point.
I think most shareholders, analysts are. I think they see companies this way.
So they're shifting capital around just before the tipping point of failure.
Yeah. And they don't necessarily want those companies to save themselves, because that's quite wasteful. There's another company coming along that can do it much better and replace them in the longer run, so I'll move my money to them.
So in that sense, the emergent biological Darwinian philosophy that you're advocating, Bill, is actually there. It's simply not within single companies; it's within clusters of companies. That the death of the single entity allows the emergence of the new species.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you're suggesting is that individual organisms should allow internal genetic variety so that they survive. But at the end of the day, why should they survive? Just let them die. Species go extinct, and dodo is out, penguin is in.
Yeah.
Why should the dodo try to become a penguin?
Yeah. If you're a private company, then you're justified in doing this because you can say to everyone, oh, it's my money, do what I want to, and I want this company to survive, and I want it to be, always involved in automotive transport, or always involved in monitoring blood pressure or whatever. That's what we want to do, and therefore we're going to invest in anything related to that because we have some skills in that area, and we have the ability to spot new opportunities, and we can waste money in those areas, and something will pop up. But if you're a shareholder company, what gives you the right to do that? Because the shareholder might say, I don't want you to do that.
I mean, the question we might ask ourselves, that maybe the current system is kind of optimal. The fall and rise of organizations is precisely the kind of evolution that you're advocating, Bill. It's just not within individual entities. It is new entities replacing old entities.
Yeah, Varsha, who has hung on, says till we're listed companies need to deliver quarterly results to the market. It's anti-Darwinian, which dictate the ability to hit target repeatedly and get rewarded accordingly. And Mark had to go on to something else and said he didn't like the webinar format, which I can easily sympathize with.
I found the quote that I was looking for. And so we're sort of leaving the ground now, so bear with me here. It often happens that the universal belief of one age of mankind, a belief from which no one was, nor without an extraordinary effort of genius and courage could at that time be free, becomes to a subsequent age so palpable an absurdity that the only difficulty then is to imagine how such a thing can ever have appeared credible. John Stuart Mill said that, apparently.
Oh,
very good.
It just, yeah, there you go. I think that's very, it kind of, because, vegetarianism, maybe we could talk about that one day. That might be interesting as well.
Oh, yes. How do you know if someone's a vegetarian? I tell you. Let's see, philosophers. John Stuart Mill. What did he do?
Utilitarianism, no?
Yep.
Was he utilitarianism?
Yeah, greatest happiness of the greatest number and all that.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that was controversial in its day.
But we saw it happening with the COVID. We are all utilitarians at the end. That's we don't want to admit it, but that's what we are. We evaluate costs and we choose the best solution. What else do you want to do on a scale, a mass scale? Individually, you can make sort of like ethical decisions, but if you run a company or a state.
Well, Bo, you raised the issue of growth. Of course, sustainability now begins to play into this a little bit, because this kind of rise and fall of organization, the lack of coordination, the slightly chaotic, deregulated nature of it all doesn't seem to me to be particularly aligned to emerging expectations of sustainability and management of resources, planetary resources, in a smart way.
Yeah, John Stuart Mill, one of the first liberal writers. I have a list of philosophers' sayings. Throughout history, the whole of the female and the great majority of the male sex were simply slaves. He was a very early liberal. Not that early, 1806 to 1873, so 19th century. Anyway, sorry for the diversion. Right.
I mean, come to liberalism, and I mean that's an interesting aspect. I mean, embedded in your approach, Bill, is a kind of is there a kind of politics also embedded here about freedom, freedom from regulation, freedom from models.
What do you think, Bo? I know what I think, but I want to hear you.
I think it's a dream that we can free ourselves from regulations. We as human beings, we would perish if we did not have rules and regulations. So we need it. We need them to exist, and that's what I think.
Do you believe in benevolent dictatorships?
No, rules can come from communities. We can create the rules together, but we need them. Absolutely. We cannot rely on the goodness of our own hearts and everybody would do the right thing. No, we wouldn't. Nope. I don't think so. Maybe it's a little bit of a negative view of human nature, but I would say realistic. What do you think, Bill?
Well, interesting that Bob raised this politics thing, because on every company that I know and have ever heard of is an autocracy. So why is it inconceivable that a company, an organization, could be a liberal democracy?
It's interesting. Yeah, this has come up in a couple of seminars recently. The blunt reality that organizations are not democracies. Every voice does not have an equal value. Leaders are not elected. Therefore, you are within a power structure. Then many of your complaints are slightly irrational and delusional in relation to the system in which you habit. Could you then have a democratic organization? Interesting point.
Well, that has been tried. I mean, how is Semco doing it? They were big in the 90s, kind of like that. The Harvard darling of how to do things different. This guy Ricardo Semler,
the Brazilian company,
and and you voted for your boss, and you could kind of like depose him or her, and your salaries were public, and you set your own salary, but the salaries were public, so people could see how much you gave yourself in salary, and they kind of like next year gave myself a little bit less because kind of like very interesting. I don't know how they're doing today and to what extent it was kind of Harvard publicity kind of thing, but it has.
But it's interesting why we don't have more organizations based upon democratic principles. I mean, it's a curiosity that we live our social lives with one set of values and principles and our professional lives with a radically different set of values, which are not easily alignable.
In the case that you've just mentioned, it was Semler something or other. As I recall, superficially, it could have been called a liberal democracy, but it was all run by one person, and it was run as a sort of experiment within a system, I don't think he could ever have been voted out. So, and I think it went autarkic before very long. So it was a bit of a pseudo experiment. But yeah, why not?
Do you have an example of a liberal democratic?
I can't think of one.
No.
I can't think of one.
Because it was interesting, during the early days of COVID, there was a lot of discussion that working remotely created distance. And I remember working with a guy who worked for Springer in Poland as CEO, and his view was actually remote working increased proximity and reduced distance. That organizational sites, where you walk onto a building of an organization, it is founded upon distance, upon elitism. Corporate spaces for the executives, top floor, which the space symbolizes distance. And within a Teams environment, everybody has the same square. And there was a threat. Many leaders started to feel their power eroding. They had to break down distance to start to connect with employees emotionally, etc.
I need a natural break, and I don't
Oh,
want to wind this thing down immediately. But can I take a natural break and then come back, and then can we review maybe a couple of final points on this, but then the format of it, and you know, the
I'm
whole.
actually, I need to go in 5
Okay.
minutes anyway, Bill. So if you could, I don't know, do we want to wrap it up
Yeah.
now and then, because I have a thing at 6 and I need
Okay.
a break in between there. How does
He's
that?
going to a bar to watch the football.
I'm gonna go for a run. Someone is gonna pick me up here. We're gonna go for a run in the snow.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Okay, so what will we take this forward? I'm going to ask Mark. Well, I've had Mark's comment and Varsha what they think of this webinar aspect of it.
Yeah.
Is it worth picking this theme up